Hello, everyone. Welcome to Inside the Americas. Here's a look at what's coming up in today's show. Donald Trump refusing to cooperate with House Democrats on the impeachment inquiry over Ukraine. We'll take a closer look. Then, a new law in California is pushing for more transparency to try and keep police violence in check. And could a pro-Hong Kong tweet bring down the NBA in China? More on the growing scandal in one of basketball's biggest markets coming up. I'm Jeannie Godula. We'll start first in Washington, where Donald Trump seems to be declaring war on the impeachment investigation. The White House sent an 8-page letter to House leaders bluntly stating it would not participate in the inquiry. The impeachment probe turned up a notch last week with the release of a whistleblower's complaint that the president sought political favors from Ukraine.
Intensifying Donald Trump's fight with Congress, the 8-page letter from the White House to Democratic leaders rejects the entire impeachment process underway in the House of Representatives. It effectively rules out any cooperation by the president in the inquiry.
Given that your inquiry lacks any legitimate constitutional foundation, any pretense of fairness, or even the most elementary due process protections, the executive branch cannot be expected to participate in it.
The White House said it objected especially to the fact that the House had not held a formal vote to launch the inquiry. But Democrats say that's not needed yet because the impeachment process is still in its evidence-gathering stage. The letter continues the White House's stonewalling approach. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said it was only the latest attempt to insist that the president is above the law.
Once again,
Democrats have struggled to investigate Trump all year, as his administration has broadly blocked and ignored subpoenas for documents and witness testimony. As the inquiry against him heats up, Trump is increasingly on the offensive.
Well, first of all, the impeachment inquiry is a scam. It's lucky that I'm the president because I don't know what, a lot of people said very few people could handle it. I sort of thrive on it.
Earlier, the president's office blocked the U.S. European Union ambassador from testifying. Democrats called that more evidence of obstruction of Congress. They're making it increasingly clear they don't intend to wait much longer and could draft the articles of impeachment, including for obstruction, by the end of the year.
Police violence has been a big topic in the U.S. recently, but one state is trying to keep it in check with more transparency. The 1421 law passed in California in January lets victims' relatives consult the files of police officers in certain cases. Our report now from Loïc de la Monnaie with Nick Rushworth.
Teresa Smith, the mother of Cesar Cruz, who was killed by 5 police officers in Anaheim.
Her son was killed in 2009. Teresa Smith asked for the full circumstances of his death but did not get the information she sought. Her campaign with other mothers to have transparency led to legislation in California obliging police to release files in certain cases. She will get the documents in the coming weeks. They will add to what she already knows.
Of the 5 police officers who killed my son, 2 of them killed 2 more young men after my son. And they got promotions, and they got awards afterwards. You put out all this stuff about him. I want to know what you've done. Are you so clean?
Wanda Johnson also lost her son in 2009. Oscar Grant's case drew more public attention at the time because it was filmed on several phone cameras. He was arrested on the Oakland Metro. Already face down on the ground, he was being held by one officer when a colleague shot Grant in the back. The police officer said later he meant to draw his taser and not his gun. The officer was sentenced to 11 months for involuntary manslaughter. Grant's mother had no information on the officer on trial, but she has it now. She was among the first to request it this year. She learned he had previously faced 6 investigations.
That's appalling to me. I was like almost really done reading after that because you knew that he had 6 prior and you're allowing him to be on the streets.
The 1421 law is a sea change for the state in a country where around 1,000 people are killed by police each year. That's around 3 per day. With California joining other states with similar laws, The Los Angeles Times has joined forces with dozens of other US media outlets to create a nationwide database on tens of thousands of police officers linked to violence or who've been investigated or sacked for misconduct. People can see, for example, who made a false statement, was found guilty of homicide, or used excessive force. One police chief says he has done all he can to implement the law. One of the challenges, simply compiling the various tapes.
The video tapes, if there's video evidence, audio tapes. So we interview people, we record those things. And before digital recorders, some of that was on cassette tapes. So we have to dig out old cassette tapes. We want the appropriate venue for turning that information over.
Tackling police violence is ongoing. A law in California from the start of 2020 requires officers to use other techniques to address threats instead of using deadly force when safe to do so.
This week also saw lots of big news stories out of South and Central America. Here is our roundup there, starting with Ecuador, where people took to the streets to protest a 123% increase in fuel prices.
Ecuadorian anger. For days now, clashes have rocked the country as workers strike over skyrocketing fuel prices, with one group of protesters even managing, briefly, to occupy the National Assembly.
We've come here because they've taken our fuel. It just isn't right. It's good for the bankers, the rich, the millionaires. But for us, it's no good.
President Lenin Moreno had scrapped fuel subsidies as part of an agreement with the International Monetary Fund to obtain loans despite high public debt. They were costing the government $1.3 billion a year. The agreement, signed in March, allowed Ecuador to borrow $4.2 billion. A Brazilian beach mystery. Across 2,000 kilometers of coastline in the country's northeast, lumps of oil have washed ashore, sparking an urgent scramble to clean up what's become a major environmental incident, as scientists investigated just where it might have come from.
This oil has what you could call a DNA, and we're using a system to check. It's not produced by Brazil, and it's not sold by Brazil. We have on our radar a country which could be the origin of this oil.
National oil firm Petrobras has said samples it took could have come from a neighbouring country, with specialists for now believing the most likely cause was an accidental spill. And Peru's political upheaval. There's been protests since President Martín Vizcarra used the nuclear option at the beginning of the month to dissolve Congress and call new elections.
Suppressing Congress against constitutional rules is a dictatorial act.
However, it comes against a background of wide-ranging corruption, including one scandal involving kickbacks from a Brazilian construction giant that's embroiled nearly every living former president and stretches right across the continent. It all left Vizcarra seeking to hit the reset button on Peruvian politics in an effort to end years of clashes between the legislature and the executive branch. He also retains the trust of the nation's public institutions, which continue to back him.
U.S. basketball has a huge following in China, but a growing scandal could bring that down. The firestorm began when the general manager for the Houston Rockets tweeted support for pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong. China's state television first said it was scrapping plans to air any Rockets games. It now says it won't air any NBA games at all. Catherine Kadir-Clifford and Valerie DeKim report.
The row between the Houston Rockets and China takes on new proportions as the Shanghai Sports Federation cancelled a fan event on Wednesday linked to an NBA exhibition game. This after China's CCTV channel announced it wouldn't broadcast any of the Basketball League's preseason games taking place in the country. The spat began over comments made by the team's general manager supporting pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong. It's since spiraled into a diplomatic incident, with China's foreign ministry reacting to the controversy.
I suggest you pay attention to the reaction and attitude of ordinary Chinese people on this matter. It is not feasible to carry out exchanges and cooperation with the Chinese side without understanding China's public opinion.
General Manager Daryl Morey has since apologized for his comments. Yet despite the growing backlash, NBA Commissioner Adam Silver is standing firm, speaking out in favor of freedom of expression.
The long-held values of the NBA are to support freedom of expression, and certainly freedom of expression by members of the NBA community. And in this case, Daryl Morey, as the general manager of the Houston Rockets, enjoys that right. There are consequences from that exercise of in essence, his freedom of speech. And, you know, we will have to live with those consequences.
Consequences that could cost the American Basketball League millions of dollars. 490 million people watched the NBA's last season in China. According to recent estimates, the league's business in the country is worth more than $4 billion.
We'll leave you now in Los Angeles, where a viral video of a homeless woman singing opera in the subway has taken her from rags to riches. Her name is Emily Zamorka. She is a trained violinist who moved to the U.S. from Russia 30 years ago before her instrument was stolen and skyrocketing medical bills pushed her onto the street. The so-called subway soprano was filmed by a police officer 2 weeks ago who was so moved by her voice he posted it on the LAPD website. Since then, Zamorka has performed her first paid concert and been contacted about a recording contract with a Grammy-nominated producer. A GoFundMe campaign has raised more than $60,000 to help her replace her beloved violin and find a home of her own. That wraps it up for this Inside the Americas. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you again next week for all the news from north to south.
En France 24 nos esforzamos por brindar la mejor información hecha por periodistas de Latinoamérica y del resto del mundo.
We look at how technology is shaping the future, and we show you the latest gadgets you can soon get your hands on.
نقدم لكم الاقتصاد بطريقة مختلفة، نبسط المفاهيم والمصطلحات كي تكتمل الصورة لديكم.
Aquí puedo hablar de medio ambiente, no solo de los problemas que afectan a nuestro planeta, sino también de iniciativas y soluciones que a veces no tienen espacio en televisión.
La différence sur France 24, c'est l'idée du reportage. Nos grands reportages, vous ne les verrez nulle part ailleurs.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.